Hi, today I'm going to discuss Become a Media Magnet, engaging students the way TV and other medias do. We've been talking about in my other classes how hands-on education is more relevant to them, and in this class we've been talking about how technology is so important and can play such a big role in education in the classrooms we have today. In this article by Peyton Anderson from the Virginia Journal of Education, he talks about how we should make things more interesting for kids in the classroom, comparing it to watching TV or having other electronics at home. He starts his article off by even saying, have you ever noticed the ratio of programming to commercials on television? Usually there's a strong pattern of about 8 minutes of content and 2 of commercial time. And he talks about how his students in his middle school class can only focus for about 8 to 10 minutes before they're distracted by something or want to move on to a new subject. He goes on to discuss how all the research is there and that television shows are created in ways that make you want to focus and stay focused on them. Even YouTube videos are not longer than 8 minutes, most if they're super popular, because it's impossible to try and stay focused on something for that long. If not, you get distracted and move on. He continues to talk about how in his classroom he's learned that if you can't beat them, to join them. And that's what he's decided to do with his lecturing and class time at his school. He makes most of his lessons in PowerPoint format and only allows them to be 8 to 10 minutes before he has a commercial break, which we'll talk about later. He uses a lot of sound, animation, and as much as he can for sensory overload in his videos, just because he really wants his class to focus on what he's teaching. And by having that bam, attention right in their face, that's what they're going to do. Just like how you see things on TV. Anything that grabs your attention will help grab your attention in the classroom. Then he goes on to talk about what he meant by commercial breaks. He has a few different types of options that he uses just to break the time up between what he's talking about and give the students just a minute or two to reflect or have a second to just wind down and start over with their thinking process. His first one is an open-ended driving question on the day's lesson. So he'll ask them something that'll kind of get them thinking about what they're going to be talking about or continuing to talk about. An open-ended driving question on the previous lesson. So he talks about something or asks a question that comes from the lesson before or maybe a previous day to help them re-engage and connect the two lessons together. He talks about a current event. This works well in social studies or history classes to kind of get them talking about things they're interested in, but also helps them focus on current events, what's going on in the world, and then you can compare the two between past events and now. A phone check. He actually gives give his students a couple of minutes so that they can stop, look at their phone, check what they need to, check their emails, check and see if they have anything going on. That way they'll be more focused instead of trying to sneak text messages or look down at their phone while they should be listening in class. Another is that he has them get up and stretch. He knows that stretching helps get your blood flowing and get you back into a new sense of learning so you can refocus on what you're doing. And so stretching is a really good way to get your kids out of their seats for just a minute and have them refocus. Lastly, he talks about how from time to time he'll show videos from projects that his class has done before, either in previous years that has to do with the lesson they're doing now, or if for some reason they've had a project due recently, he'll break them up into where they present those projects in break time during their commercial breaks during the lessons he has. He even talks about how you can address these content specifically, using math problems for review, using new words or phrases for foreign language classes, or showing a chemical reaction in science as a commercial break. That way, they see something cool, it keeps them engaged, and it gives them a minute to just stop thinking that they're thinking. While these maps seem a little bit awkward, he says that they're going to take practice to get better. And that sometimes, even if you don't necessarily know what you're going to do, that's okay because the surprise for you is the same for the surprise as the students. And they really like surprises. Don't worry that your kids won't be able to handle it. He says that even his special ed students and center-based gifted program that he has at their school, that they sometimes even enjoy the surprise of it. But that doesn't fit for every lesson and that you shouldn't just do that every single time. That would just mean you're unprepared and not doing really well. His next thing that he talks about is his PowerPoints and how he makes them. And I thought it was funny, he entitled this section PowerPoint or PowerPoint Lists, showing the difference between the two. He talks about how you can have a whole bunch of different ways that you can make PowerPoints to be successful. He has always solid backgrounds and no weird font colors because he's afraid that if he uses a cool font or a bright color that it'll distract too much, or that you won't be able to see it in the same way that you see it on the computer when it's on the projector. He says, next, less is more. Don't put a huge amount of words onto each slide, which even as a college student, I understand, because if there's too many words, I don't want to read it and I don't want to continue learning what's going on. I just start hitting next, next, next. And if you're in a classroom setting, kids are just going to say next, next, next in their mind, and they're not going to pay attention or actually read what's on the slide. Make every move and every sound count. Even though he adds a lot of sounds and a lot of transitions, he makes sure that every single one has a reason and that it's there for a reason, because if not, kids are just going to find that weird or become more interested in the sounds and the movement than they are of what's actually making the sound, why it's making the sound, why it's there, or why there's a certain thing moving on and what is moving onto the screen. He also talks about having pictures because that's a good eye catcher and a good way to distinguish and remember the different things you're talking about. But that you also need to adapt any of this material depending on the class and how you want your slideshow to look. Last, he talks about different classroom technology characters. First, our chalkboard cowboys. He says, folks in this camp are still a little bitter about indoor plumbing and wishing kids still had to walk to school uphill both ways in a hurricane while milking the family cow and writing President Roosevelt a letter. Don't fall into this trap. So he's basically saying don't be the old person that doesn't believe in new technology. Use it to your benefit. Make it work. It doesn't always have to be the best, and you don't always have to be the most knowledgeable about it, but you can find from other people other ways to make it relevant in your content area. Don't necessarily just be so scared that you don't use it at all. Urban cowboys are the ones who wear the boots and the hat but have never done the work. He talks about how they say they know what they're doing, but they never really do. They only talk about how they use this new technology when they're in front of bosses or other employees, but that they don't really use it in the classroom. Next is the town crier cowboys. These guys aren't urban yet. They know they're tech savvy, but they use it at all the technology meetings and in ways that are just too much on overload. They're just basically trying to make themselves look good. And also there are the real cowboys. These are the ones who go hard, work hard, do all the work, make it work in the classroom, and don't try and flash it around for bosses or employees. They're strictly using it in ways that matter for their students and in ways that can help incorporate things into their classroom. Last, at the very end, he talks about how we have to be lifelong learners if we're going to be lifelong teachers. Constantly there's new technology coming, and we constantly have to be aware of how to adapt that and change it and fit it into our classroom settings in ways that make it most beneficial for us, which is very true, and I think something that we'll all continue to work on. Thanks.